On October 7, 2023, Hamas militants attacked southern Israel from Gaza with rocket fire and barrier breaches, targeting both military and civilian sites. Israel retaliated with heavy bombings and a ground invasion in Gaza, significantly escalating the conflict. The violence impacted not only Gaza, but also the West Bank, and heightened tensions at the Lebanese border, drawing global attention to the conflict. Because of this, all eyes are on Israel and Hamas. Given this video's sensitive nature, we have decided not to take a sponsorship, and because of YouTube's guidelines around covering sensitive events, portions of this video had to be censored. That is why we are funding this video through our community on our website, Armchair History TV. There you can find an uncensored version of this video, which we've made completely free to watch using our discount code UNCENSORED100 for a free month subscription. Despite all scenes being animated illustrations, some content may be disturbing, so viewer discretion is advised. Producing these videos is costly, so the best way to support our channel and access uncensored or exclusive content is by becoming a member of AHTV. At the time of this video's release, we're up to 145 fully exclusive history videos made by 65 different history channels. Original content is produced weekly, ensuring there's always something new. To access our video catalog, use the code UNCENSORED100 for a completely free month. As an Islamist political and militant organization, Hamas has been central to the Palestinian struggle against Israel since its formation in 1987 during the First Intifada. With a goal of establishing an Islamic state in historic Palestine, including current-day Israel, Hamas gained prominence after winning the 2006 Palestinian elections and subsequent defeat of Fatah during the 2007 Battle of Gaza. With Hamas taking over as the de facto rulers in Gaza, tensions and clashes with Israel increased. Despite Hamas being designated a terrorist group by most Western nations, their path of armed resistance remains key to maintaining support among Palestinians. Their cause aims to fight the ongoing Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories like the West Bank, raising tensions due to Israeli settlement expansions and a growing sense of oppression among Palestinians. These elements, coupled with Israel's economic and political isolation of Gaza, have also been central to the escalating hostilities. Amid rising violence and political shifts in Israel, a significant majority of Palestinians in the West Bank expressed support for armed resistance against Israeli occupation. A 2023 poll conducted by the Palestinian Center for Policy and Survey Research revealed that 72% of Palestinians endorsed groups like the Lion's Den and Jenin Brigade, known for their hard stance against the occupation. This sentiment was fueled by Israel's increasingly hawkish policies and ongoing military actions in Palestinian territories, which were perceived as dismissive of the two-state solution and precipitated frequent violence. Over the course of 2023, Palestinian grievances reached a critical point, with escalating settler violence, numerous administrative detentions, and a sharp rise in Palestinian casualties, fueling growing tensions. As Hamas bolstered its fighting force, warnings from the US and Egypt about its activities went unheeded by Israeli intelligence, including Mossad. They underestimated Hamas, dismissing detailed plans for a large-scale assault and an invasion involving drones and paragliders as beyond their capabilities. Concerns raised by the Israeli Signals Intelligence Unit about Hamas's preparations were ignored, reflecting a belief that Hamas was contained and seeking to avoid full-scale war. However, that was not the case. On October 7th, around 6:30 a.m., Hamas commenced their full assault on Israel, codenamed Operation El Aqsa Flood. This offensive began with a widespread rocket barrage targeting key Israeli military and civilian locations. Simultaneously, over 3,000 militants infiltrated the Israeli barrier, using aerial drones to scout over and disable Israeli observation posts, while fighters used paragliders, speedboats, and motor vehicles to bypass security perimeters. The capture of checkpoints and breaching of border fences allowed access for larger vehicles to pass through as Palestinian militants rapidly gained ground. Following the breach of border checkpoints and fences, the Hamas militants initiated an amphibious landing in Zikim, where Israeli sources reported that 10 civilians were murdered at the beach, with another 9 gunned down in a nearby shelter. The Israeli Defense Force responded by killing 2 attackers on the beach and destroying 4 vessels, including 2 rubber boats. Nearby, Hamas militants also captured a military base near Nahal Oz, leading to the deaths of at least 2 Israeli soldiers and the capture of 6 others. Intense fighting also ensued at the Reem military base, where Hamas temporarily seized control of the base and took several Israeli soldiers captive, although the IDF later regained control. Additionally, the police station in Sderot fell under Hamas control, with militants killing 30 Israelis, including policemen and civilians. Hamas targeted rural Israeli communities, causing widespread destruction and civilian massacres. Multiple hostages were also taken from populated towns near the Gaza border. A music festival near Reem faced an especially brutal attack, with mass casualties and more hostages. Allegations of sexual violence against Israeli women, supported by Israeli forensic evidence, were also made. Hamas and the Palestinian Authority disputed the mass casualties, blaming them on Israeli strikes. But Israeli police contended that their aerial response caused only a minor portion of the casualties, primarily from friendly fire. Israel's military response was initially slow, with helicopters from the north facing difficulty distinguishing militants from civilians. In the chaos, pilots initially bombarded targets indiscriminately, attacking around 300 sites in just 4 hours. Gradually, target selection became more cautious. The confusion was worsened by militants employing tactics to blend in with civilians. Specifically, they deliberately avoided running or making sudden movements to mimic typical civilian behaviors during air raids. This tactic made it challenging for Israeli forces to distinguish them from local civilians in the area. By 9 a.m., amidst growing disarray, some helicopters engaged targets without prior clearance. In a televised appearance, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu declared that Israel was at war and threatened to turn all the places where Hamas is organized and hiding into cities of ruins. The IDF launched Operation Swords of Iron, signaling a full-scale military response. Israeli forces mobilized extensively, and a state of emergency was declared, significantly restricting civilian movement in areas close to Gaza. The IDF's measures included a total blockade of Gaza, cutting off electricity and essentials, leading to widespread criticism from human rights groups. Allegations of using white phosphorus munitions by Israel were reported by Human Rights Watch and verified by Amnesty International, but denied by Israeli authorities. By October 13th, the IDF issued urgent evacuation warnings for northern Gaza, giving Palestinians just a day to relocate south. Faced with a harrowing decision, many Palestinians remained in place as Hamas, defying the IDF, urged them to stay. Amidst a storm of international criticism of Israel's tactics, the IDF made a controversial accusation. They claimed Hamas was using civilians as human shields. In response, counterclaims from the media emerged, alleging that Israel had struck civilians along designated safe routes into southern Gaza. Israel disputed these counterclaims, maintaining their stance on the situation. On the 17th of October, tragedy unfolded in southern Gaza, as Israeli airstrikes, while targeting Hamas, once again wrought havoc on civilian areas. Over 70 lives were lost, including those of families who had fled from northern Gaza seeking safety. Among them was Ayman Nofal, a senior figure in Hamas's military wing. While a victory for the Israelis, further airstrikes in civilian-packed areas sparked concerns among international observers and human rights groups. They began to question whether the Israeli military's desire for retaliation was overriding fears of civilian casualties. The escalation of the Gaza conflict intensified on October 27th as Israeli forces initiated a major ground assault in northern Gaza. The situation grew increasingly dire when the World Health Organization issued warnings about potential attacks on Al-Quds Hospital, a critical refuge for thousands of Palestinians. Concurrently, Palestinian access to Al-Shifa Hospital was severely disrupted by Israeli airstrikes, significantly impeding vital medical efforts. By October 30th, the IDF had sealed Gaza's Salah al-Din Road and deployed armored units in the Zaytun district, leading to intense clashes with Hamas's Al-Qassam brigades and the Democratic Front's National Resistance brigades. These groups employed anti-tank missiles and heavy artillery against IDF vehicles, with Israeli casualties giving impetus for further resistance from Palestinian militants. Beyond engagements with the Al-Qassam brigades, the IDF's extensive use of airstrikes was directed against the Jabalia refugee camp on October 31st, causing dozens of fatalities and injuries. Eyewitness reports described catastrophic scenes, with the numerous casualties predominantly being women and children. This attack in particular led to international outcry and several countries severing diplomatic ties with Israel. The first group of evacuees, including the critical wounded and foreign nationals, began leaving Gaza for Egypt on November 1st. A total of 500 evacuees were to be moved over several days, with 200 already at the border. Meanwhile, the Jabalia refugee camp endured a second devastating bombing, prompting the UN Human Rights Office to express concerns about the potential war crime implications of such attacks. Two days later, an ambulance convoy was hit in an airstrike, killing 15 and injuring 60. The IDF claimed that the ambulances were being used by Hamas, a claim that the Palestinian Red Crescent Society and Hamas officials strongly denied. Strikes against a civilian school and hospital claimed more lives on November 4th. Turkey, condemning Israel's actions and their refusal to accept a ceasefire, recalled its ambassador. Meanwhile, Palestinian militants continued to harass Israeli units in pitched urban battles, claiming 24 vehicles up to that point. Further strikes against hospitals led the Human Rights Watch to call for a weapons embargo on both Israel and Hamas. This fell on deaf ears, as the US pledged to supply Israel with $320 million worth of precision-guided bombs. On November 13th, the IDF began a number of operations aimed at clearing out underground tunnel networks and headquarters located beneath the city of Gaza. In one of these raids, the IDF claimed to have discovered a suspected Hamas holding area for Israeli hostages beneath the Al-Rantisi hospital. They also claimed to have found a calendar titled Operation Al-Aqsa Flood, linked to the 7th October massacre. But the interpretation of this calendar was contentious and widely debated. Reports of civilian casualties were leaked after a raid on Al-Shifa Hospital, with the IDF claiming that they were there for humanitarian assistance. Netanyahu also cited hostages as a reason for the IDF entering the hospital. Conflicting reports emerged about the IDF providing aid at Al-Shifa, where they claimed to have discovered weapons, indicating a Hamas command center. However, recent investigations by the Washington Post found no such evidence of any command center. Evacuation notices in southern Gaza and a fuel-induced telecom blackout escalated concerns. By November 20th, IDF assaults against the Indonesia hospital in Gaza drew international criticism, mostly due to the fact that a significant number of civilians and medical staff were still inside during the attack. After a month of brutal fighting and mounting pressure throughout November, a ceasefire agreement was finally reached on the 22nd between Israel and Hamas. This included hostage releases and a temporary pause in hostilities, facilitated by Egypt and Qatar. The ceasefire aimed to seed a broader peace agreement. Unfortunately, the brief Gaza truce collapsed on December 1st, with Israel and the US blaming Hamas for the breakdown. Israel resumed hostilities with airstrikes, especially in the southern city of Khan Yunis, and enforced evacuation procedures. Hamas suspended hostage negotiations, demanding a halt to attacks and the release of Palestinian prisoners. For the IDF, alleged discoveries of concealed weapons and militant equipment found throughout areas of southern Gaza gave them further impetus to press their campaign. The US called for renewed hostage negotiations and civilian protection, but Amnesty International raised war crime concerns due to US-made weapons used in airstrikes lacking military targets. Fierce fighting and bombing in Gaza has intensified in the north, with the IDF claiming to have uncovered another large weapons cache located adjacent to the El Amal Health Clinic and Beit Lahia School. Over December, Israel shifted its military campaign to the more densely populated south. This focus not only complicated Israeli operations, but greatly increased the risk of civilian and military casualties. The IDF, reorienting toward ground operations over airstrikes, issued evacuation warnings to Palestinians in Khan Yunis before commencing military operations. The US continued to support Israel's stance against Hamas, though there have been increasing disagreements between the US and Israel regarding the escalation of military actions. The West also urged the establishment of humanitarian corridors to assist the 2.3 million people in Gaza, highlighting the critical need to minimize civilian harm. The offensive marked a fraught second stage in Israel's military campaign. 400,000 displaced Gazans moved south, becoming cornered in a region racked by intense urban combat. Khan Yunis, a power base for the Hamas leadership in Gaza, also underwent heavy fighting. Internationally, the UN stressed the importance of safeguarding civilians and facilitating humanitarian aid as accusations of genocide continued to grow. Though the US said likewise, they vetoed resolution drafts by the UN Security Council, stalling attempts to address the Palestinian crisis head-on. Meanwhile, a Hamas delegation was dispatched to Cairo on December 24th, discussing a potential ceasefire plan with Egypt. As 2024 unfolds, the world watches with bated breath, hoping for a peaceful resolution to a conflict that continues to take a heavy toll on lives and stability in the region.